thank you for attending this evening's debates. The League of Women Voters of the Hampton, Shelter Island, and the North Fork is pleased to be sponsoring these debates for the candidates running to represent us in New York State.
Thank you for
I heard running to represent us in New York State Assembly District Number 1 and Senate District Number 1. There will be 2 debates this evening. The first will be for the candidates for New York State Assembly District Number 1, Peter G. Ganley III and Fred W. Thiel Jr. The second debate will be for the candidates for Senate District Number 1. I'm Estelle Gelman. I'm from the League of Women Voters of the Hampton, Shelter Island, and the North Fork, and I will be moderating the first debate. Kathy Peacock will moderate the second. The other member of the League, whom you will see on screen, is Barbara McClancy, who will be our timer and who is chair of our Voter Services Committee, which organized these debates. Others in the League who were instrumental in enabling this debate are Arlene Hinkemeyer, who is our publicity chairperson and served as liaison with CTV, and Neil Cohn, who will be monitoring the debates this evening. Our thanks go to all those who contributed questions for the debate, and a very special thanks to CTV and Charles Certain, in particular, whose technical support has made it possible to hold this debate. We also thank the candidates for agreeing to participate, and we thank you for watching. Just a word about who we are. The League of Women Voters is a political but nonpartisan national organization. While we never endorse parties or candidates, we do study and take positions on issues affecting our community. Foremost among our goals is to educate voters, stimulate voter interest, and encourage voter participation. We are respected for sponsoring fair and impartial debates such as this one, and for the educational materials we distribute on voting issues. Now, to move on to the ground rules for this debate. Since we don't have a live audience, the questions were all submitted in advance and vetted to ensure that they are appropriate for this debate. Each candidate, speaking in alphabetical order, will have 2 minutes for an opening statement and up to 2 minutes to respond to each question. They will then have 1 minute for a closing statement, at which time they will speak in reverse alphabetical order. In addition, each candidate will have 3 opportunities for a 1-minute rebuttal to the response from the other candidate. If you would like to take advantage of this opportunity, please raise your hand and keep it raised until you're sure that I see you. And be sure to keep an eye on the timer. We will now begin the debate with the candidates' opening statements, and Peter Ganley will speak first. Peter.
All right. Well, thank you guys. Thanks to the League of Women Voters for hosting this debate. Thank you to Assemblyman Thiel for once again agreeing to spend your evening with me. And thank you for everyone at home who's engaging in the democratic process. My name is Peter Ganley. I'm running for New York State Assembly in the 1st Assembly District. I live in Southold. I'm a North Fork guy to my bones, but over the last couple months, I've gotten to know the South Fork pretty well as well. Knocking on about 500 doors a week, talking to voters about their concerns. I'm formerly a staff member to Congressman Lee Zeldin, and I firmly believe he will be the next governor of New York, and I look forward to working with him again to deliver for the East End. I believe there's never been a more difficult time to be a New Yorker. We have the highest taxes in America, a rising violent crime problem, and rampant and obvious corruption in Albany. This majority has absolutely no interest in solving these problems. I believe the role of a representative is twofold: cut taxes where you can, and where you can't, make sure the money comes back home for important projects in our district, like our environment, our local waterways, and finding a solution, excuse me, to our affordable housing problem. I'm a big supporter of term limits. I believe the longer that somebody's been in office, the easier it is to vote along party lines and do what leadership tells you to do. My opponent's been in office longer than I've been alive, and I definitely believe we need new energy in New York. I have a vested interest in the future of the East End, and I plan on living the rest of my life east of Riverhead. and our problems are too big and too serious to re-elect somebody with one foot out the door who's currently in the process of moving to North Carolina. We deserve somebody as a representative who is accountable, transparent, and most of all, present for the fights that we need to be fought for our shared future.
Thank you. Fred?
Well, thank you, Estelle, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this debate and for the critical role you play in our democracy. Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here tonight and to again speak to the voters of the 1st Assembly District. I am the incumbent. I have been your assemblyman for 27 years. And when you are the incumbent, this is all about what is your record? What have you accomplished? What have you done for the East End of Long Island? And I think that is the strength of my candidacy. You look through the years, I have had creative solutions to the problems that have confronted the East End, whether it be the Peconic Bay Community Preservation Fund, which has protected more than 10,000 acres of open space, farmland, and wetlands and historic sites throughout the East End. The nomination of the Peconic Estuary to clean up the estuary and restore it to its former grandeur. The creation of the South Fork Commuter Connection to provide public transit as an alternative to the traffic that we're dealing with. Record aid for our school districts, supporting our traditional industries of farming, fishing, and tourism. And how do I get those results? First of all, it's experience. You don't trust important jobs like this to somebody who's never done any community service and never been involved at government at all. And second of all, you trust it to somebody who knows the district. I have lived in Sag Harbor for 69 years. I went to Pearson High School. My kids went to Pearson High School, and I'm not going anywhere. My wife sold her house. We had 2 houses. We're building a vacation home. Someday I'm going to retire, and I'm going to spend a few months each year in North Carolina because I've spent 30 winters in Albany. So, you know, if I'm going to enjoy it when I do, but I was born in Sag Harbor. I don't know if I'm going to heaven or hell, but I'm going to do it from Sag Harbor. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we will
an opening statement.
No, we don't rebut opening statements.
Okay.
We'll now begin the questions, and Peter will be the first to answer the first question. New York State has recently instituted early voting, and by executive order, absentee voting has been allowed without the usual reasons. Do you support such reforms as no excuse absentee voting, same-day registration, and consolidation of presidential and local primaries into the same day? Would you please explain why or why not? Peter?
So for consolidating presidential and local primaries, yes. For expanding on the already great idea of early voting, early in-person voting, absolutely. It's been a fantastic opportunity to so many people to expand the amount of days you're able to vote. And as far as absentee voting, I think it's important to make sure that everybody who has a legitimate excuse to vote by absentee can. That excuse can be, you know, somebody who's sick, somebody who's afraid of getting sick, somebody who's away at college, somebody who's serving in our military. But I do think there should be a reason to vote by mail, that you should have to give a reason. And there are plenty of legitimate reasons. I'm hopefully going to use the rest of my time just to rebut the opening statement that Fred Thiel has mentioned earlier. He was issued a certificate of occupancy on his home in North Carolina on June 13th of this year. This is not a far off when he retires thing. He already spent a significant amount of his summer there, and that is why the Commission to Reform LIPA did not meet when it was supposed to legally meet. He's the chair of that committee, and he didn't show up to work. Thank you.
Rebuttal. I haven't spent a significant amount of time in North Carolina. We were down in North Carolina to close on the House. This was not, these debates are, it's not supposed to be about personal attacks, and this is a personal attack.
It's not personal.
My wife and I have a second home that we're building in North Carolina. That is a true fact. It is a second home, a concept that we all know about here on the East End of Long Island. And the reason with regard to the LIPA Commission has nothing to do with that. It had to do with the fact that, number one, I didn't get appointed until the end of July, and I had COVID. And it took me a while to recover from COVID. And now we are out and we have picked an executive director. We will be appointing in the next couple of weeks the advisory committee for that LIPA commission. We'll be holding hearings in November, and we will meet the deadline of April 1st for the report from the LIPA commission.
So I know that that's a lie. Because,
Low back and forth, please.
Sorry.
Fred, you need your 2-minute response to the question.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes. New York State has recently instituted early voting, and by executive order, absentee voting has been allowed without the usual reasons. Do you support such reforms as no excuse absentee voting, same-day registration, and consolidation of presidential and local primaries into the same day? Would you please explain why or why not?
Sure. With regard to primaries, we had 3 primaries this year because of what happened with redistricting. I certainly support having the state and federal primaries as one primary, as we have previously done. I think the presidential primary should be separate. Those are separate issues, the president electing delegates. So I think there should be, in presidential years, there should be a separate presidential primary. I certainly have been a strong supporter with regard to early voting. I believe that it should be extended. I should point out that my opponent in the Board of Elections last year and who he worked for, our congressional candidate on the Republican side, didn't allow an early voting site on Shelter Island. So much for supporting early voting. People on Shelter Island last year couldn't vote with early voting. They'd had to get on a ferry to go to an early voting place. So I don't see that as being supportive of early voting. And as far as absentee ballots, there were 2 propositions last year. The voters rejected those propositions. I respect the voters' position, but I do think with regard to registration, we should reduce the time frame. I believe it's 10 or 15 days further so that it's closer to Election Day.
Yeah,
Okay.
can I rebut? He said that I wasn't for.
You can rebut. All right, we have a rebuttal.
That is not true. I've always been a supporter of early voting. When I was at the Suffolk County Board of Elections, I worked in the inspectors department. My job was training the very poll workers that work on election day. It's a selfless job. I also have advocated for paying them more money and shortening their hours, because for so many people who believe it is their, a lot of these people believe it's their civic duty to go help out and work at the polls. And some of them are older and they can't sit for a 16-hour day. And I want to invite more people to be able to do that by shortening the hours. I've advocated for that. Meanwhile, I worked in the inspectors department. I have nothing to do with any lack of an early voting site on Shelter Island. I've spent a significant amount of time on Shelter Island.
Your boss did.
Months. My boss at the board
and your congressional candidate did.
What? No cross talking, please.
Okay, if you'd like, I could tie you to all the things that Bridget Fleming has said, if you'd like, and some of her positions on things. That's just that's a straw man argument, and Fred knows it, and it's kind of a strange, cheap shot.
Okay, let's go on to the second question, and Fred, you will go first this time. Subsequent to the recent Supreme Court decision regarding concealed weapons, Governor Hochul signed legislation strengthening the state's gun laws. With the legality of provisions of this legislation now in question, what actions would you suggest to be taken in regard to gun control in New York State?
Well, I think my record shows strong support for gun safety across New York State. And it started with the SAFE Act about 10 years ago. It's been extended to expanding background checks, instituting a red flag law and expanding that, and voting for restrictions on concealed weapons in the state of New York. Now, not surprisingly, that law has been challenged. And that it will make its way through the court system. A judge has kept the law in effect until the decision is final. So we'll have to wait for the final decision from the courts on that. But suffice it to say that my record has been perfectly clear, and I've been very, very supportive with regard to gun safety. New York State has some of the best gun safety laws in the country. And I was proud to be a co-sponsor and to support them.
Thank you. Peter?
So I think our priority should always be about getting guns out of the hands of violent criminals. That's why I support red flag laws. And that's why I support making sure that people who have been convicted of domestic violence can never own a firearm for the rest of their lives. We need to stop things like the Clean Slate Act, which would call that into question and would make it harder for employers to find out if they're about to employ somebody who's been convicted of a violent felony, of a violent crime. I'm a big supporter of making sure that we focus on the 92% of gun crimes that happen with illegal guns and getting those off the street.
Okay, thank you. And on the next question, Peter, you will go first. With the Dobbs decision, abortion rights are now in the province of the states. Would you be in support of any changes in New York's current position on reproductive rights? And if so, what would you recommend?
Yes, so not massive sweeping changes. Two changes come to mind. I believe in parental notification for somebody under the age of 18. And I believe in third trimester, abortions should be limited to cases of rape, incest, life of the mother, and life of the child.
Okay, Fred?
I believe that the Supreme Court did us an incredible disservice this summer with the Dobbs decision. They've undermined the concept of privacy in this country that extends not just to reproductive rights, but a whole host of other rights that are dependent on privacy. The question is, I think, who are you going to trust in the future in the state legislatures? Because now the state legislatures are the last line of defense. New York is a pro-choice state because the state legislature has been pro-choice. Are you going to trust this issue to somebody who has a proven record of being pro-choice, or somebody who says, well, I'm pro-life, but I'll only make a few changes? You know, we've heard this argument before in Washington that Roe v. Wade was settled law. You don't have to worry about it. You heard it in all of the Supreme Court confirmation hearings. It's settled law. Well, but then when the decision came, I guess it wasn't settled law. If you want to protect a woman's right to choose in the state of New York, you have to support legislators and candidates that are pro-choice and not pro-life and say they're just going to tinker around the edges with a woman's right to choose.
Thank you. Now we're going to have question 4, and Fred will go first. There are fears that there will be a surge in COVID cases in the winter months as people spend more time indoors. Should a serious surge materialize, what measures, if any, such as masking, proof of vaccination, etc., would you support?
Yeah, as far as COVID, and you know, I think you have to see what are the facts and what is the situation at that particular point in time. I do not support mandatory vaccinations. I would not support that. The decisions with regard to masking, I do not believe we need executive orders and statewide action. I would leave those decisions to local health departments. As we've seen this evolve, you know, you see New York is a big state. You'll see a spike sometimes upstate, but not on Long Island. Different parts of the state are dealing with different issues at that time. I would leave most of this to our local health departments to make those determinations, but I would ensure that the state provides the resources that local governments need to handle the crisis.
Okay, thank you. Peter?
So I also think the local governments have a role to play, but I absolutely do not support a mask mandate, a vaccine mandate. And I think every one of our healthcare heroes that got fired during the pandemic for not receiving a vaccination should be rehired with back pay. I'm vaccinated. I'm a big believer in the vaccine, but people shouldn't be fired for their personal healthcare decisions. And I think that our current assemblyman should have standed with healthcare heroes and defended them during the time where they were being laid off.
Thank you. All right, the next question, and Peter will go first on this. Long Island is surrounded by water, and we have heard all the warnings of rising sea levels due to climate change. What role do you see for the state in assisting our towns to deal with the consequences of rising sea levels?
So absolutely, I think the state has the role to play of grabbing every grant they can to secure money for projects to preserve our environment. Man-made climate change is real. It is a problem, and we are surrounded on water. We live in the most beautiful assembly district in the state by far, and that is because of where we are in proximity to the water. I have a vested interest in this, and I don't think you're going to see much of a difference between my opponent and I and our urgency to fix this issue.
Fred?
Well, you're right about one thing. We do live in the most beautiful assembly district in the state, and
Just
it didn't
one thing?
happen by accident. It happened because officials such as myself and Ken Laval and others working together in a bipartisan fashion put together the programs and the funding that ensured that this is the most assembly district. That's why everybody wants to come to the East End. With regard to climate change, my district has more coastline than any assembly district in the state. No district is going to be more impacted by climate change than my district. The first step and the first down payment with regard to climate change is to vote for the $4.2 billion bond act that I helped to craft and helped to co-sponsor in the New York State Assembly. That's where the funding is going to come to meet the goals that we set in the Climate Act of 2019. We've set the goals. Now we have to implement them. So you can't do it without money. I believe that that the Bond Act is that first step. And I think we have to be aggressive in going after the polluters, the people that are caused this. I don't want taxpayers paying for all of the changes that need to be made for climate change. It should be the polluters that pay, the people that caused this in the first place and lied to the public saying that their industries and what they were doing were not going to have any impact on the climate.
Thank you. All right, let me give you the next question. The pandemic has led to the closing of many small businesses, job loss, and reduced state revenue. What actions would you support to help our local and state economy recover from the effects of the pandemic? And Fred, you go first on this.
Well, first of all, I think some of that is what we did in Albany in the last couple of years. And the first thing is to reduce taxes. You know, in this last year, we put a cap on the gasoline tax. We accelerated the middle class income tax cut, and we provided a substantial rebate to property taxes. That's the first step. The second thing that I would do for small businesses, and the thing that is hanging over their heads that I hear from small businesses time and time again, is the issue with unemployment insurance rates. The state of New York should use its money to pay down its debt, seek some relief also from the federal government, and not put the burden on small businesses. That's what other states are doing. I signed a letter months ago urging the governor to do that. When I talk to small businesses, the issue of these costs of unemployment insurance are what concerns them the most. And then, in addition, you know, for the industries that we have here, you know, whether it be the hospitality industry and agriculture and tourism, you know, we need to foster those businesses. And you know, we've provided funding, you know, grant funding for small businesses coming out of the pandemic. And certainly we have helped to direct those funds to our local businesses here on the East End. But I firmly believe that first and foremost, the thing that we could do most for them is to continue to help them with the tax burden.
Peter?
So absolutely, we need to lower taxes. You know, we have some of the highest taxes in America. In New York State, you have to balance a budget. So you need to make sure if you're cutting taxes, you also need to be cutting spending, and you need to identify where that spending cuts need to be. And I believe those cuts need to be on some of the ridiculous non-big contracts in New York, such as the $600 million football stadium in upstate New York. That's a vanity project and corporate welfare to one of the wealthiest NFL owners in the country, as well as some of these bids that Hochul donors are getting with government contracts. We need to lower the taxes for small business, and you know, we need to fix that. Long Island's hard to afford, especially our district. You have people who are my age who are moving out of the state because it's hard to afford to live here, and then you have people who are retirement age, like my opponent, who are moving out of the state because it's hard to live here on a fixed income. And I definitely believe we need to make this more affordable and a better place to do business and a smarter place to do business and attract more businesses in with a more competitive tax climate.
Thank you. All right, let me give you the next question. Public transportation is important for both economic and environmental reasons. What role do you see for the state in increasing access to public transportation? And Peter, you go first on this one.
So I support the South Fork commuter connection. I support making sure that the Long Island Railroad is able to reduce more rates for Long Island and to be better for commuters going up island or to the city. And we might need to expand. We need to add another line here. We might need to provide the resources to people who can figure this out, find out where the biggest opportunities are for people who want to take this public transport and use it to really, because it solves two issues. It solves an environmental problem and it solves a traffic problem. And those are two of the biggest local priorities here on the East End.
Okay, thank you. Fred?
Well, thank you. And thanks for agreeing on the South Fork commuter connection. That's another one of those specific, definite proposals that I have put forward that does that, not some generality. Now, what we need to do is expand the South Fork commuter connection, and that's what we're beginning that process. The only complaint I get about the South Fork commuter connection is that there isn't enough of it. And we need infrastructure improvements. We're working with the Long Island Railroad. The president of the railroad, at my behest, is coming out in November to meet with the supervisors and mayors on the East End, because we need sidings, S-I-D-I-N-G, and 4 or 5 strategic locations on the South Fork so that trains can pass each other. And that will allow us to have more service. So that certainly is number one. And certainly, secondly, with regard to traffic, the state needs to work with local governments on creative programs to move traffic that we do have. Working with Jay Schneiderman and in Southampton and Jesse Warren in Southampton Village to be able to put the lights on blinking during the rush hours so that traffic can move its way through. Those are the kinds of creative solutions that working together that we can use to deal with the traffic problem on the East End. I also want to point out that we need more creative solutions with regard to buses. Certainly County Legislator Fleming on the county side has, with some of her demand public transit proposals, has worked hand in glove where we have cooperatively, linked the trains with the buses to provide better public transit. We have a long way to go, but we're finally making those first important steps with regard to public transportation.
Thank you. And Fred, you'll go first on the next question. Increasingly, women are dropping out of the workforce because of a lack of childcare and the high cost of adequate care. How would you propose to ameliorate this problem in our state?
Well, first of all, I try to do that now when we have legislative capital funding or legislative discretionary funding. That's where I put the money. Places like the Bridgehampton Child Care Center and the Eleanor Whitmore Center in East Hampton, so that they can expand their programs. Overall, child care is economic development. We need to create more and more slots. That is, clearly is part of the economy. It especially in single parent families, it's critical. And we certainly have a lot of that here on the East End. So, I do it certainly with our local organizations and our local child care centers. And I believe, adequate state funding to expand the number of slots so that we can meet the need for childcare so that women can continue to participate in the workforce.
Thank you. Peter?
Absolutely. And that's what being pro-life means to me. It means making it easier for women to raise children on Long Island and making it more economically viable for them to do so. I think we need to expand child care options for women so they can re-enter the workforce. And I also believe in, obviously, I believe in paid maternity leave. And I believe in more pro-family policies to make it easier for people to raise children on Long Island and participate in the economy at the same time.
Thank you. And Peter, you'll go first on the next question. Are you in support of limits on campaign financing and a public campaign financing system? How would you propose to improve the financing of campaigns?
So I think I heard most of that question, but I support limits on campaign contributions. I'm also the only person in this race who has advocated for limiting people who do business with the state to be able to contribute to campaigns. We see the same story time and time again. Somebody gets a ridiculous no-bid contract from New York. We pay twice as much, almost twice as much as California for COVID tests. The one state where we shouldn't pay more than for anything. And it turns out, what a surprise, the manufacturer is a Hochul donor. And someone like Fred Thiel, who sits on oversight and investigations, has done nothing about it and sends a letter saying that they have no authority. They have the authority to subpoena people. And that's what the Republican members have responded to him. But at the end of the day, we need to crack down on some of the obvious corruption that goes on with campaign contributions in this state. And I'm the only one in that is going to put up the fight and do it.
Thank you. Fred?
Well, first of all, I support public financing of our campaigns, which will go into effect, which the legislature approved. I didn't hear Mr. Ganley say anything about that. But the first thing we need to do is get that system up and running. And I think that's the first priority. There should be a level playing field to run for office, and public financing contributes to that. And certainly, in addition, it gives alternatives to people so they don't have to go after the big donors. To me, that's an important part of this. And, as a member of the state legislature, I've supported limits on campaign contributions, and I certainly support that. The biggest problem we have is the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United. Ever since then, that's when campaign financing has run amok, with trying to equate money with speech and corporations as people has done a great disservice to this country, and it's limited our ability to limit the adverse effects of money on our political process. But I think the biggest step for us is to have a good and viable public financing campaign system. I think that's the best way to do it. Not just limiting the impacts of big money, but also leveling the playing field for candidates to be able to run for office.
Thank you. And Fred, you will go first on the next question. Long Island faces challenges in sustaining clean water due to the pollution of the aquifer. What do you believe the state can do to help preserve the safety of all water?
Well, again, this has been something that I've been in the middle of from the beginning. I mentioned the Peconic Estuary program at the beginning. Federal and state funding coming to local governments for the Peconic Estuary program. We were able to put $500 million for water quality infrastructure. That's how Suffolk County is funding their rebate program to get homeowners to put in IA systems to reduce the amount of nitrogen in the water. Again, this is another place where I think polluters should pay. The governor just signed a bill of mine that they changed the law so that the Suffolk County Water Authority will be able to sue the polluters, the big chemical companies, with regard to emerging chemicals that have polluted our waters. The Water Authority has had to institute all sorts of special measures because of these emergency chemicals. That should not be paid for by residents of Suffolk County. It should be paid for by the polluters, and my legislation will make sure that that's the case.
Thank you. Peter?
Absolutely, and this is another situation where I plan on grabbing every grant I can find for clean water. I support fully funding the Peconic Estuary and partnerships that would, help our environment and improve the quality of our drinking water. I think the county and the state both have roles to play in that. And I'm not sure you're going to find a big difference between the intentions of Mr. Thiel and myself on the importance of protecting our water quality on Long Island.
Okay, thank you. And Peter, you will go first on the next one. What is your position on state legislators being allowed to earn outside income beyond their legislative salaries?
Well, I think it depends on what the job is. Obviously, if there's a conflict of or a potential conflict of interest, we need to identify jobs that could potentially be a conflict of interest, then that should not be allowed. But as well as, a small business owner, also being a representative in the state, as long as that business does not do business with the state, I have no problem with that. At the end of the day, it is a part-time job on paper, although I plan on being a full-time legislator. Anybody who knows me knows I don't know how to work less than 80 hours a week. So I plan on really going full force into it. And I certainly myself won't have time to find a second job.
Okay, thank you. Fred?
It's not a part-time job. It's never been a part-time job. And, we work at this full-time. You do a disservice when you describe it as a part-time job, because that just has never been the case.
That's why I use quotes.
Yeah. I certainly would support some limits on outside income. I've supported that in the past. It has never gotten any traction in the legislature. I certainly don't. I don't have a problem with there being outside jobs, and we are supposed to be citizen legislators, but this should be your primary responsibility. And any limits on income, I think we can have limits on income, but I wouldn't completely outlaw the ability of people to continue with their professions or with their jobs to some degree.
Hey, thank you. And Fred will go first on the next one. What is the with the loss of jobs due to the pandemic, many individuals have lost their employer-sponsored health insurance. In the short run, how would you propose to help those who are currently without insurance? And in the long run, would you support the New York Health Act? Please explain why you do or do not support the act.
Well, I support universal health coverage. I think that is better implemented on the federal level, and that's where it should be done. There's different ways to do that. You could do Medicare for all. You could do a public option. I support them. I think healthcare is a basic human right. In New York State, we have expanded Medicaid as far as you can expand it to increase the coverage for our citizens. People talk about how expensive Medicaid is, but part of that reason is because we have expanded the number of people that are covered, and we also get federal dollars for that. So I think it's through the Medicaid program that we can do that. And your health care shouldn't depend on your job. And my record has certainly been supportive of all efforts for universal health care.
Thank you. Peter?
So I support an option, a basic tier of healthcare for people who can't afford it. We need to make sure that people who can't afford it, have some form of basic coverage. I do not support a universal Medicare for all system, one policy. I don't support that at all. But I am a supporter of making sure that people who are sick can get coverage and it doesn't bankrupt them.
Thank you. And Peter, you will go first on the next one. What do you see as the three most pressing issues facing our district, and how would you propose to address them?
Well, we've talked about a lot of them, but we haven't talked about crime yet. So I'm going to start with crime. And although it's not necessarily, while there is crime in our district, it's not, as much as it is in New York City, but that doesn't mean it doesn't affect us. I've been talking to people, voters at the door whose kids are in New York City going to school, or their brother's an officer in the NYPD. And people are scared. We have a rising violent crime problem. People like Fred Thiel voted for cashless bail, co-sponsored clean slate, which could seal the records of people convicted of arson, manslaughter, and domestic violence. And cashless bail, you just have a situation where people are committing violent crimes, getting arrested, being released, committing another violent crime, and being brought back in again. This is It's not sustainable. It's a bad policy, and it should be repealed, and we should start over.
Thank you, Fred.
Well, let's talk about cashless bail. I do not support cashless bail, and at the time of the state budget, which is where cashless bail was included, wrongly, by the way, I never think that we should be doing major policy initiatives as part of the budget. But it was included in the budget, and I voted for the budget. But I stated at the time I did not support the bail proposal. To vote against the budget, I would have had to vote against $700 million for our local towns and villages, the South Fork commuter connection, money for our farmers, money for our small businesses, which we just talked about, money for clean water infrastructure, money for the Peconic estuary, record levels of school aid for districts like Hampton Bays and Riverhead. And if I had my opponent, who doesn't seem to have much ethics as far as I can tell, would have been running ads and sending out mailers that Fred Thiel voted against school aid and he voted against the Peconic estuary. So my choice was to vote for the budget, vote for the local needs in my district, and then sponsor legislation that would roll back, and there have been two laws already that have rolled back some of the bail. We need to go further, and where we need to go further is by giving judges more discretion. And the record is clear. The bills are in. My name is on them. I support giving our judges more discretion when it comes to the issue of bail. I also support expanding the number of crimes that would be eligible for bail. But I don't think that was your question. Your question was about
what were the three most pressing issues?
Well, I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to go quick. Three most pressing issues are housing, which we haven't talked about at all tonight. I urge people to vote for the Community Housing Fund, which Senator Palumbo and I sponsored and the governor signed, and 4 of the 5 towns will have a referendum. The sustainability of our communities depends on housing. Second is transportation and traffic. I don't need to go on that because I spoke about it before. And third, we've spoken about before, it's water quality in the environment.
So I'm going to rebut. That's okay.
We have a rebuttal.
So, Fred is upset that, it got rolled into, and we agree that major, controversial policy changes shouldn't just be thrown into the budget. But who's in a good situation to try and do something about that and change the process in Albany? Someone like Fred Thiel, who's been there for almost 3 decades, who's had every opportunity to try and change that process. And as far as, I was opposed to cashless bail, I stated it at the time, I don't think he was allowed to vote no on cashless bail. You can see he's voted with the Speaker of the Assembly on virtually every single issue. There really is no independence there. So at the end of the day, he voted for cashless bail. Just because it was in the budget doesn't mean, you get a pass on voting for it. Because if you voted no as a senior and respected member in the Assembly, they would have had to go back to the negotiating table and take some stuff out. You're this senior member in the Assembly, you have a certain level of influence. I would like to believe that if you voted no, other members would follow you, this senior member, and vote no as well. So they'd have to come back to the negotiation table and take it out.
Okay. That was the last question. So thank you. And we will now listen to your closing statements. And Fred, your closing statement comes first.
Well, thank you very much. And again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this debate. It is greatly appreciated. And I'm going to end where I began. I have a track record. You can look at my record. You can see the specific proposals, the things that I have moved forward for the East End on issues of the environment, transportation, water quality. We've talked about all of them tonight. I have a record, and you can see the specific things that I've put forward. Compare that with my opponent tonight. Not one specific proposal, nothing but generalities, nothing but personal attacks. He believes if he repeats the lie enough, people will believe it. Well, I have a track record, and Mr. Ganley has a trash record, and he just wants to talk trash. Well, on election day, you can put out the trash, and I ask you that you keep the steady leadership that the East End has had working for them for the last 27 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you guys for having me. This was great, and thank you to Assemblyman Thiel for coming up and debating me on these issues. I'm not running against the Fred Thiel from 15 years ago. I agree that a lot of the work he's done in the environment is stuff that I support and look to continue and look as honestly a model of how we should legislate these issues in the future. I'm running against the Fred Thiel these last couple terms, who voted for cashless bail, voted with leadership on 98% of the issues, who in the process of moving out of the state, who is checked out, and who doesn't have another independent bone in his body. And I'm running to be your independent representative for the East End so I can fight for the issues that are going to define our future.
Thank you. I would like to thank both candidates for your thoughtful and informative responses, and to thank all of those viewing this debate for joining us. We will shortly begin the second debate. You're supposed to go off.
Skyler, don't forget to unmute yourself. There you go.
You may begin.
Welcome to a debate between Skyler Johnson and Anthony Palumbo, who are vying to be the representative for New York Senate District Number 1. My name is Kathy Peacock, and I'll be the moderator for this debate. We'll be following the same format as the previous debate. So let's begin with the 2-minute opening statements, and Skyler, you'll go first.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I want to thank you for doing this tonight. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for having us, and thank you to everyone watching. So hi, everyone. I'm Skyler Johnson. I'm the Democratic nominee for New York State Senate District 1. So following redistricting, this seat encompasses all 5 East End towns, so Southampton, East Hampton, Shelter Island, Southold, Riverhead, as well as North Shore, Brookhaven. So it's a large, diverse, and beautiful district, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to run to represent it. So I currently work for a nonprofit called New Hour for Women and Children, which works with formerly incarcerated women and their families. So what we do is we help with reentry services for those who have been incarcerated, which helps to keep crime low. The recidivism rate, the amount of people who will recommit crimes within 5 years of leaving prison, is over 70% for the general public. For New Hour members, it is about 2%. So I'm very proud of the work that I'm able to do to help people as well as to keep our streets safe. I also sit on the board of Temple Beth Emeth of Mount Sinai, which is the synagogue that I was raised in, and I previously worked for Mayor Jesse Warren of Southampton Village. There is so much at stake in New York, and there's going to be a lot of issues that we're discussing today. We have reproductive rights on the line. We have the environment on the line, as we have seen the ravages of climate change. As we had our last debate, we watched Florida being ravaged by a hurricane. We need to fight to make sure that we are keeping Long Island safe and affordable. There is so much happening. There is so much at stake, and we need a leader who is aware of the issues, who is on the right side of history, and who will be here for the district to make sure that we get the job done. I am running to make sure that Long Island is a quality, that it can remain a beautiful place to live for generations to come. I'm so excited to be running. I'm so excited to share my vision with you tonight, and I appreciate you all taking the time to listen to me. Again, we're going to cover a lot of issues, and I think that it's going to be very enlightening to hear the differences between me and my opponent's positions tonight. So I appreciate you all being here, and I look forward to having an in-depth conversation with you about the issues.
Thank you. Anthony?
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for having us here. It's been a few years. We've been doing this for some time. In my experience, my background is that I'm a former Suffolk County prosecutor. After leaving that office after several years, I was an attorney in private practice. And in 2013, I ran for office. First time I'd ever run for office. I had never been in politics before. I know many of you may know me, having been representing the South Fork in the Senate for this one term. But in 2013, I ran for the New York State Assembly on the North Fork, the 2nd Assembly District. Fortunately won it, was there for 7 years. And then when our old friend and mentor, Senator Ken Laval, retired in 2020, he asked me to run for his vacant seat. And I did so and have been there for the past 2 years. So I'm married. I have 2 children. I have secured, fortunately, I think my record will speak for itself. Now, the 10 years, 9.5 years I've been in the legislature, I have endorsements from the teachers to law enforcement, virtually every law enforcement agency in the county and state, civil service unions, AFL-CIO, bricklayers, transportation workers. I've had a 100% score with the National Federation of Independent Businesses. And so that is really consistent with what we've accomplished. Earlier, Assemblyman Thiel mentioned, just recently, I carried the affordable housing bill that's for referendum in 4 of the 5 East End towns. In my short tenure in the Senate, I passed 37 bills that I was the prime sponsor of, many more that I was a co-sponsor of. So I look forward to these conversations because I have been able to bring back billions of dollars in record school aid to my former Assembly district and now my Senate district. So I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about, and I appreciate my being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to go to the questions. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question and may offer a 1-minute rebuttal to any 3 questions. So Skyler, you'll be first. New York State's Climate Act, passed in 2019, requires the state to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 40% by 2030 and no less than 85% by 2050 from 1990 levels. What specific efforts or proposed bills do you support to address climate change in the state? And are you in favor of the Environmental Bond Act that's on the ballot this year?
So absolutely. So I appreciate this question. Our district is beautiful and our district is so impacted by the ravages of climate change. So it's critical that we are addressing this as a top priority. I am endorsed and working very closely with Assemblyman Steve Engelbright, who's the chair of the Environmental Conservation Committee in the Assembly, who was behind that act in 2019 that we're speaking of right now. I'm also endorsed by the Sierra Club, which is a large environmental organization working to make sure that we are striving towards a cleaner New York and a cleaner United States. So there's a lot that I want to see happen in New York. I want to see greater reliance on renewable energy. I want to see us pull away from fossil fuel dependency. I want to make sure that we are looking at electrifying New York's bus fleet and investing in public transportation to make sure that we are able to reduce the number of cars on the road and have clean and effective ways of travel that do not pollute our environment. That also ties into the transportation issue, to the traffic issue in our district. And so that this is an issue that has a lot of intersection and a lot of meaning, especially for the Twin Forks of Long Island. There's a lot that we need to continue to do in New York. I want to make sure that we're seeing greater producer and manufacturer responsibility when they're polluting and making sure that those who pollute are cleaning up what they pollute. It's reducing certain fertilizers that lead to nitrogen runoff that pollute our water. Our district has had serious issues with water quality. And so reducing runoff would be major for the health and livelihood of our district. There's a lot that needs to happen, and I'm very excited to work on climate bills in the legislature because this issue cannot take a back seat. The other thing about investing in green energy is that it is massive for the economy of the district. I absolutely support the Bond Act that's going to be on the back of the ballot this year. I hope everyone turns over their ballot and votes yes. It will lead to the creation of 100,000 new jobs in New York, but it will be instrumental in protecting the environment within New York State.
Thank you. Anthony?
Well, I certainly do support the Bond Act. In my tenure, I've been, the entire time that I've been in the legislature, I've been on the Environmental Conservation Committee. I voted for the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, helped pass our Clean Water Act when I was in the Assembly. I co-sponsored the Extended Producer bill. We've got very specific expansions of the CPF, the Community Preservation Fund, specific to the 5 Eastern towns. Assemblyman Thiel and I did that together and extended it out to 2050, and also extended that, and those of you may recall that the Community Preservation Fund was really for development rights initially to preserve open space. We extended that now up to 20% of it can be used for clean water initiatives. And just generally speaking, I had actually authored a kelp bill, making that legal for farming, and ultimately that did pass last year. Something that, of course, enhances our aquaculture and farming, of course, but that again reduces nitrogen, which is our biggest concern, that we, of course, drink from the sole source aquifer below our feet. So all of this is kind of collective, that there are many broad strokes that we need to keep in mind. Traffic, for example. And so a lot of that, and that almost segues into the affordable housing bill. We can talk about this for many, many hours, actually, but that's something that clearly we support. My Senate district, and I saw Assemblyman Thiel mention, he has the the most waterfront in his assembly district. Of course, I have the most waterfront of any Senate district in this state. So that is absolutely critical, that we continue to invest in that. And please, as my opponent just mentioned, please vote for that bond act. That's $4.2 billion that will go to the right direction.
Thank you. You're going to be first on the next question. Living on the East End is becoming more and more expensive, especially for those in critical positions like teachers, healthcare workers, members of the fire departments. What proposals do you have to support residents of the East End with escalating costs of living and a potential recession?
Sure. My very first bill in the assembly was a first-time home buyer exemption. This affordable housing bill that we just discussed, that I carried in the Senate, Assemblyman Thiel carried it in the assembly, that was signed by the governor. The town boards adopted it, and 4 out of the 5 eastern towns have it on for referendum. That helps as well, because we actually had a forum, televised forum, about a week or so ago regarding school teachers in East Hampton. And a school teacher testified. She came up and said, you know what? I'm one of 2 people that live in the town of East Hampton. Everyone else commutes. So as far as recruiting and retaining good teachers, no one wants to drive out here. It's just unaffordable, and it's outrageous. So that's really one step in the right direction. Generally speaking as well, unfortunately, we are the highest taxed state in the country. And I'm someone who thinks less government is more. We need to reduce the mandates that we have on small businesses. We need to do what we can to try and create more affordable housing by way of our fund. I think is a good start, but there's more to do. There's transportation elements to it. So I think that we can continue to do what we're doing as far as moving forward affordable housing and trying to make our way of life a little bit more affordable. But school aid, lastly, and you know what, you see this 30 seconds, by the way, you try and use up the entire time, but I won't go all the way to the end on every question. But these ideas, there's so much to it. But subsidizing our schools, as I said earlier, I was able to bring record school aid. Every dollar that goes to schools is $1 off of your property taxes. That is clearly 2/3 of that or more in some occasions is going to our schools. So subsidies from the state and everything we can do as far as those other programs is certainly a step in the right direction.
Thank you. Skyler?
So there's a lot that we need to do to make Long Island more affordable. And one part of this that I talk about that I don't think gets spoken about enough is IDA reform. So when we talk about industrial development agencies, about the groups that oversee what companies receive tax breaks within your municipalities, there's a lot of times a lot of corruption and cronyism that takes place during that process, and it ends up wasting taxpayer dollars. So I want to make sure that we're not focusing on giving tax breaks to these giant corporations that are coming here anyway, and that money is going into the pocket of small small business owners and of families. I come from a family of small business owners, and my family has lived on Long Island for decades now. I want to make sure that people can afford to stay here, but that's making sure that we are championing the middle class, not huge corporations. I know that my opponent does not believe that the ultra wealthy, that the billionaires that we have in our district, which is many of them, should be taxed. And I want to make sure that we are not raising taxes on the middle class, but that we are making sure that the wealthy are paying their fair share. It is really crucial that we are bringing home money for the middle class, that we are bringing home money for small businesses, not the privileged and wealthy few. I am endorsed by 1199 SEIU, which represents thousands of healthcare workers throughout New York who are struggling to afford to stay on Long Island. I'm also endorsed by the Council of School Supervisors and Administrators, which represents thousands of, like it sounds, school supervisors and administrators, current and retired, throughout New York. And everyone is struggling to afford to stay here. So it is really crucial that we are enacting policies that will allow people to afford to stay on Long Island, that will root businesses here on our main streets, that will allow people to build and thrive on the island. And it comes down to an affordable housing issue at the end. There is barely any affordable housing throughout my district, not just on the South Fork, but across the island. So it's making sure that we are talking about developer responsibility, that we're looking at accessory dwelling units, and that we are electing people who are going to support bringing home funds for affordable housing, not just building giant mega structures from corporations.
Thank you. Anthony, you'd like to make an additional comment?
Thank you, Kathy. Just a quick clarification that Mr. Johnson had mentioned that I don't think that millionaires and billionaires should be taxed. I voted against the ultra millionaires taxed. Not that they should not be taxed. They should certainly pay taxes and pay their adequate fair share. The problem is, and I think COVID has shown this, that we lose that revenue because those folks are moving out. We have the largest out migration of any state in the union. So it sounds great to say that as a talking point when you study that at university, but the truth of the matter is, in reality, it's exactly what I said was going to happen. In fact, the former governor said the same thing that I said about that ultra millionaires tax, that they can move. Remember, he was asking them, Governor Cuomo said he cooked them spaghetti, come back from Connecticut. I mean, this has actually come to fruition as we expected. So it doesn't have to do with not taxing them. It has to do with when you overtax them more than any other state in the nation, they have the means to move. And that's unfortunately what they've done and taken their tax revenues with them.
Thank you. Skyler, you wanted to make an additional comment?
Absolutely. Well, Senator Palumbo, while I'm glad that you're in agreement with Andrew Cuomo and the donors that donate to both him and to support your first runs, it has really become a talking point that, oh, the billionaires are going to leave. But here's my question. You just said that we have the most taxed state in the union. So why haven't they left already? If they're really going to leave, why haven't they done it? Why aren't they fleeing New York? Why do we have, I believe, 123 billionaires here and not zero if it's just that easy for them to leave? And the answer is because they don't want to and because they're not going to. It has become a Republican talking point over the years to claim, well, we can't tax them. We can't pay for our social services. We can't fund our infrastructure from them because they'll leave. And then they never do. They stayed through the pandemic. If they stayed through COVID, I'm sure that they're going to continue to stay. And we should be making sure that the wealthy are paying their fair share, because we have a very large amount of ultra wealthy people throughout our district. And it is critical to make sure that they are helping us to fund the programs that allow them to live good lives on the island while allowing everyone to live good lives on the island.
Thank you. Skyler, you'll answer the next question first. New York State has instituted early voting and no excuse absentee voting, yet turnout is still very low. In addition, there continues to be accusations of voter fraud in various parts of the country. What would you do to increase voter turnout and to ensure the security of voting in New York State?
So I'm so happy that New York passed the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. I'm friends with the author of that bill, and I was very happy to see that go through. We need to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to keep our elections secure and make it easier for people to vote. You know, as I'm talking to voters throughout the district, I have heard a disturbing amount of voters who are very, very nervous about this election. You know, we're currently watching the tapes of the former president of the United States attempting to overthrow the results of a free and fair election, and that is reflected in and voter insecurity now. So first of all, it's making sure that we have representatives who believe in democracy and believe in the right for people to vote, but it's making sure that we are increasing early voting sites, that we are making sure that polling sites are throughout all our communities and that they are within a small distance of all our communities. It's making sure that absentee voting is easy, that it's uncomplicated, and that it's available to all. And it's making sure that the proper amount of voting information is out there for everyone. I was quoted in the New York Post a couple months back because there was a referendum by me for our local ambulance district where 0 people came out to vote. And I know that that sounds unbelievable, but there were 0 votes cast in this referendum because no one was informed about the election and there was not given any proper information, to the point that I was not aware it was happening, nor were the elected officials in the area. So it's really crucial that we are spending money on voter education, that we are making sure that everyone is aware of when and how to vote, and that voting information is clear and accessible. This is especially a problem this year with the Suffolk County hack. With the Suffolk County website down, it is really crucial that people have easy access to information and can easily access this information on how and when to vote, and that they are not being intimidated at the polls. So I am going to support additional election reform. Again, it's expanding absentee voting. It's looking to try to lower the registration when people need to register for the election by. It's making sure that everyone has the ability to vote without interference. And so I'm looking forward to championing voting rights legislation in the legislature.
Thank you. Anthony?
Well, sure. And I mean, that's interesting, Skyler, that you could have turned that election, that ambulance election, if you'd known about it. But yes, I do. I certainly support that. And interestingly, in 2020, in the Senate district, about 185,000 votes cast, over about 212. So we've always, believe it or not, on the East End have a tremendously high turnout, which is great. But generally speaking, broad strokes, I supported early voting. I certainly do support, and I actually voted for some of the no excuse absentee bills, because the second part of your question was also election security, and creating an absentee request form that is done by internet without a signature raised some concerns for me. I know that that's something that we could always make it quite easy. And what they would typically do in the old days is you would request your absentee ballot, you'd sign the request, and then you would sign your actual ballot, and they would compare the signatures. Now there's no signature at all to compare. And so some of those bills, there were a number of them that came through. Some were actually really good, and I supported them. Others, I think, were a little too loose. Maybe it's the former prosecutor in me. I never did any election cases. As I said earlier, I was in the office for several years. I was a supervisor, handled major cases like rapes, robberies, homicides. But those are the things that are critical to society, right? A free and fair election. So I do support it. You just have to be careful. I think the bill language is very important.
Thank you. You'll go first on the next question. After the recent Supreme Court decision regarding concealed weapons, the governor signed legislation strengthening the state's gun laws. With the legality of provisions of this legislation now in question, what actions would you suggest be taken regarding gun control in New York State to keep our schools and neighborhoods safe from gun violence?
It's almost as if they're two separate questions, but what would we do? Well, it comes down to enforcement. And no matter, you can look at several studies, all of them have the number at 94% or higher of gun crimes are committed with illegal guns. We have some of the toughest gun laws in the nation. I believe that law is going to be struck down. It was extremely general. I think it was a knee-jerk response, almost something done in a political year for political purposes. Further regulating the lawful gun owners is something, look, all guns can be dangerous. I voted for the red flag law. I voted for mental health background checks. I think that there's always smart ways that you can control guns getting into the wrong hands. But we don't prosecute people who are now running rampant in our streets. For whatever reason, and there are many reasons that we will probably discuss at some point in this debate, whether it's the reforms, the bail reforms, other discovery reforms, all these raise the age, all these bills and criminal justice packages that have come through the legislature in recent years, that clearly has emboldened the bad guys and bad gals. That's emboldened criminals. And as a result, that's what's spiking crime. The fact that we're not prosecuting people. And maybe that's me. My dad was a Suffolk County homicide detective. I'm from a law enforcement family. As I said, I have all the law enforcement behind me because that's something that's been in my blood. I've actually been in that business. So, you know, there's a balance there in the system of criminal justice. But I think the best way to prevent gun violence is to actually prosecute gun violence.
Thank you. Skyler?
So first of all, I am a Moms Demand Action Gun Sense candidate of distinction. I've been recognized for my commitment to gun safety laws in New York. And Senator Palumbo, I know that one of the last times we debated, you claimed that this vote didn't occur, but you did vote against banning domestic abusers. You voted for, there was a law to ban domestic abusers from buying firearms, and you voted to allow domestic abusers to buy firearms. These were convicted domestic abusers. These were convicted domestic abusers. You are a career prosecutor, and you've talked about that throughout all this entire campaign. So it's very concerning to me that you think that someone who's been convicted of attacking their spouse should be allowed to have a gun. You have also voted against requiring a license for semi-automatic weapons. You voted against increasing penalties for improper storage of a gun. These are all common sense measures that I am pretty sure that we would have near universal support from within the district. It is critical that we are electing people who actually believe in common sense gun regulations that most gun owners agree with. Listen, my grandfather has always been a card-carrying NRA member. He was a rifle instructor for the NYPD as well as for the NRA, and he supports and has always supported every one of these measures. Gun owners support these measures because they are aware that it's how we keep our streets safe. We make sure that we're increasing penalties for improper storage of guns, something that, again, you voted against. So we have to make sure that we are passing common sense gun legislation within New York, and it's also creating a coalition of states surrounding us to make sure that we are working with state legislators in New Jersey, in Connecticut, in Pennsylvania, to make sure that they are also passing common sense gun legislation. So that way we don't have a flow of guns coming in from out of state into New York. There's a lot that we can do, and there's a lot that we need to do because gun violence is on the rise. I believe it is currently the number one cause of death for children in the United States. That it's horrible. Gun violence is the number one cause for death for children in the United States. So we need legislators who believe in common sense gun control and who are not going to waver on the issue.
Thank you, Skyler. Anthony, you'd like to make an additional comment?
Yes, thank you. So, and I looked up that bill because I was wondering what Skyler was talking about. And the bill that he is talking about is addressed all of the crimes that are already the law. All of that was already the law. That's another one that's probably going to be declared unconstitutional. I've been fighting my entire career on behalf of victims. So to suggest, I mean, it's a great political talking point. You know, this is the fun of this season. You know, common sense always sounds good, right? But it's when it's completely unconstitutional. For example, and I just made a note for out of state, the other one, but requiring licenses for semi-automatic rifles. And obviously you're running for the wrong office if you think that you're going to have some effect on what Pennsylvania is doing. The bill that we're talking about, the one I did vote no on, requiring a license for semi-automatic rifles, because it did absolutely nothing. This was after the top shooting in Buffalo. Exactly what happened with that shooter, he went to Pennsylvania, bought a semi-automatic rifle, brought it to New York. That bill didn't even cover that at all. We can't regulate what happens in Pennsylvania. So again, it was a political. You got it. Thank you.
That you got. Okay. Next question, Skyler, you'll be going first. The New York Commission on Ethics and Lobbying in Government was created by Governor Kathy Hochul and legislative leaders this past April. Do you think the changes from the Joint Commission are appropriate or adequate? Do you think it will really be able to hold the legislators accountable?
So I absolutely hope so. You know, I'm glad that we're talking about the topic of ethics here. And, you know, Senator Palumbo, while I know that you don't think that we should apparently be working with other state legislators, with other state legislators, other bodies of government to pass laws, which should always be cooperative, I do want to make sure that we're at least following some sort of ethics in office here. And I think that there's unfortunately been a lot of unethical behavior in this race and beyond. So Senator Palumbo, we've talked about this before, about your decision to, in the town of Riverhead last year, which is when your constituency sued a homeowner to prevent the illegal operation of Airbnbs, you acted as their attorney against the town, against your own constituency, while actively representing that constituency. Incredibly unethical behavior. Doesn't matter if it's legal or not. I think that anyone would agree that a representative should not be acting as a lawyer against their constituents. Your job, first and foremost, is not to be a part-time senator who goes to your law firm full-time. It is to represent your constituents here. And I know in a similar vein, you've sent government mailers up to and past the deadline, making sure you're spending as much taxpayer money as possible on this race, so that way all your constituents see your name. It is this unethical behavior in this race that I want to make sure that we have a commission that is strong enough to look at. So I'm always happy to see legislation to strengthen ethics investigation within the state of New York. And so I want to take a look at how that's performing. It's hard for me to speculate on how that's going to do without being actually able to see the data on that. I'd like to see how that performs throughout the next legislative session. I want to make sure that we do have a commission that is strong enough to tackle these ethics violations and ethics complaints throughout New York. And if we're having a problem with that, I want to make sure that the New York State Senate next year takes actions to strengthen ethics investigations, to strengthen those who can look into legislators, and to make sure that legislators are engaging in an ethical and a meaningful way to protect their constituents, not act against their own best interests.
Thank you. Anthony?
Thank you. And as the ranking Republican on the Ethics and Internal Governance Committee, I think that Jacob didn't have enough teeth. I'm hopeful that this new committee will actually have some teeth. They were able to essentially recommend sanctions. So we'll see how that goes. And yeah, I've been attacked. You know, it's awfully bold accusation from a 21-year-old who does not own a home. I own a home, and I have a kid in college. I have an 11th grader who's about to go to college and a wife. So I do need to, unfortunately, continue to work a little bit at my wife's law firm as a lawyer. I'm not so sure. I'm sure Skyler's parents may know what it's like to live on Long Island, but I need to do so. And as was mentioned in the previous debate with the assembly candidates, look, this is something that my record speaks for itself. As I said, I passed 37 bills in the past two sessions in my term in the Senate, more than many majority members. So this is not a part-time job, my friend. This is a full-time job that I work very hard at, and I work weekends and evenings and occasionally do help out in the law firm because we're a citizen legislature. And I think you heard it from, it's an attack. It is what it is. This is the game that when you don't have real policies to debate, you can go after my policies all you want. You make me out to be some kind of a monster and may go after me personally. That's fine. I have a thick skin. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about is, the voters have every 2 years to judge whether or not I'm doing my job. And this is election number 6. Fortunately, I'm 5 for 5, and we'll see where this one goes. And if they don't think that I'm doing my job, then so be it. Then they'll certainly have the opportunity to decide on November 8th.
Thank you. Skyler, would you like to make an additional comment?
I absolutely would. So Senator Palumbo, while it is very unfortunate to me to hear that you don't believe that people who cannot afford to home owns on Long Island know what it's like to live here, I'm a little bothered. I'm a little bothered by that comment because of how many renters you have throughout the district, like myself, people trying to afford to build a life on Long Island, people who are trying to afford to live here but cannot afford the astronomical cost of homes here. So, by the way, Senator Palumbo, you make $110,000 as your base pay in the New York State Senate. Let's not pretend that you're taking a volunteer stipend and then have to go to your full-time job here. There's a bit of contradiction in your statement here because you're both saying, well, I have to work here to survive, but also I don't really work at this law firm. My wife does it. Both things cannot exist at once. You have chosen to serve in a full-time position where to maximize your profit while ignoring your constituents. I am hearing so many reports of people who your office has ignored over the last couple of years because you are not treating this as a full-time job. But again, to disparage renters, to disparage those who cannot afford to live in your district is so despicable from a representative. And I am so sorry to everyone here who is struggling to afford to live on Long Island, who has to experience that coming from their senator.
Thank you. The next question, Anthony, you'll go first on it. Abortion rights are now in the province of the states. Do you support New York's current position on reproduction rights? Would you recommend any changes?
So I voted for the Equal Rights Amendment to codify that. And as I mentioned earlier, I think the people should decide. I'm kind of a less government is more kind of guy. And I think that that certainly will be passed next year and will become part of the woman's right to choose will be part of the New York State Constitution.
Thank you. Skyler?
So it's unfortunate to me that Senator Palumbo has unfortunately tried to run away from his record on this, has used the Equality Amendment as a way to avoid his own responsibility on the issue. So reproductive rights are under attack across the United States. The only reason why reproductive rights remain legal within the state of New York is because we keep electing people who will keep it legal. You know, we had a Democratic Assembly for decades, thankfully, that helped to protect the reproductive rights within New York, but we'll see what happens in states that do not have legislators that will act on the best interest of their constituents. We had a woman in Texas who was going into sepsis, who needed a medically necessary abortion, and who was actually actively dying because her doctor was on the phone with his lawyer to figure out if he could be criminally or civilly prosecuted if he performed this medically necessary abortion. She was about an hour away from dying. She was actively going into septic shock when the doctor finally acted to save her life. It was almost too late. If he had waited any longer, she would be dead. Senator Palumbo, you voted against the Reproductive Health Act, and while you cite late-term abortions, that has been an excuse that you have used to vote against reproductive rights without repercussions. You know, you agree with, I believe, 75% of positions of the far-right extremist Long Island Coalition for Life, which believes in banning abortion entirely from as I described it, from conception to natural death. They do not believe in abortion in any way, and you agree with them on almost all of their positions. We are going to protect reproductive rights in the state of New York, and we need to elect pro-choice representatives, not those who are going to say that they're pro-life and then try to push the responsibility onto someone else. Senator Palumbo, if you are ever given a chance to vote on a bill to ban abortion in New York, I have no doubt that you will happily take that vote. But without trying to speculate too much on the future, I want to look at the past and look at the fact that you have, over your tenure, repeatedly voted against protecting reproductive rights, and people die as a matter of that. You said that you do not support exceptions for the life of the mother in what you describe as late-term abortions. The only reason that someone would be receiving an abortion late is if their life is in danger. By voting against exceptions for the life of the mother, you are putting so many people at risk. You are putting so many women at risk throughout your district, and I really hope that you revisit your position here.
Thank you. Anthony, would you like to make an additional comment?
Sure. And just to actually state my record, that's and now you know that's not true. So I'm going to have to use the word. It's a lie. I have a daughter. I have always supported abortion for the life of a mother and rape and incest. I did vote many years ago because of the late-term abortion bill that also repealed all aspects of the homicide statute related to abortion. But look, bottom line is this is the politics, the political game, because it is a serious issue. We get it. But for 47 of the 50 years prior to 2019, the Senate was in Republican hands. And we had a Republican governor for at least 12 of those years. And abortion was legal in New York prior to Roe versus Wade. Abortion was legal during Roe versus Wade. Abortion is codified and will be legal in New York. So the whole fear-mongering thing that, God forbid, don't vote for any Republican because they're going to take that right from you is just untrue. And to state my position inaccurately, when, as I said, I have a 15-year-old daughter, that's very offensive to me.
Thank you. This is going to be the last question. And
I'm sorry. Would I be able to use my last rebuttal here?
I am sorry, Skyler. I put a mark and then I forgot to. Sorry. Please go ahead.
Yeah, not a problem at all. So Senator Palumbo, while I'm glad that you believe that having a daughter gives you jurisdiction to make decisions over women's reproductive health, it absolutely does not. So first of all, you are lying about your position here. I would encourage any voter on here to do the research themselves. Actually, just Google Anthony Palumbo Reproductive Health Act. You'll find a Riverhead local article in which he was quoted talking about how he does not support exceptions for the life of a mother. So no, that is a lie. Also, you keep talking about, well, the Senate was in Republican hands. We had a Republican governor. The assembly was held by Democrats. It has not, New York has not been in Republican hands for the last 50 years. Abortion has remained legal in New York because we have had legislators that have prevented extremists from banning abortion in New York. So if we want to keep abortion and protect reproductive rights across the board, protect the right to contraception, correct the right for a woman to choose what they do with their own body, we need to elect people who are pro-choice, not people who are going to waver on their record and try to make sure that they, and try to help, honestly, lead to the death of women so that way they can score political points with their base.
Thank you. Now we really will have the last question, and Skyler, you're first. We've covered a lot of issues tonight. Please tell us what you see as the 3 most pressing issues facing the district and how you would address them.
Absolutely. I, by the way, I want to say I do appreciate the depth and the variety of the questions tonight. It's been really incredible, all the topics you managed to cover. But so I want to make sure, first of all, that as a top priority, that we are protecting reproductive rights within the state of New York, but that we are investing in our critical roads and infrastructure. Anyone from Suffolk County knows how bad our roads are. Everyone knows from Suffolk County knows what it's like to play Mario Kart on the Long Island Expressway, especially during the winter months and beyond, and how dangerous it gets. This year we lost so many tires. I've heard of so many bent rims, of so many people having to make an emergency stop at the mechanic because of how bad our roads are. So it's making sure that we have the funds and that we're bringing home funds to invest in our roads and critical infrastructure. It's making sure that we are keeping Long Island affordable and that we are doing everything that we can to build a thriving middle class, and to make sure that Long Island is for everyone, to make sure that Long Island is for college students. You know, I'm a Stony Brook graduate myself, and again, while Senator Palumbo doesn't apparently like the renters in our district, and since even though they don't know how to live on Long Island, according to him, I do, and I understand the struggles that we face. So it's making sure that people from all our communities, not just affluent communities, communities are able to afford to live on Long Island. I am a 3rd-generation Long Islander. I want to make sure that my children will be 4th-generation Long Islanders, but that may not happen if we are not building a more affordable future. Affordability is always going to be the top issue here. And then, like I said, it is things like investing in our roads and critical infrastructure to make sure that our tax dollars are going to good use and to make sure that Long Island is, again, an affordable and a pleasant place to live. We need to address the affordability crisis on the island. There is no more time. People are leaving. I have had neighbors who lived here for 50 years leaving now because they can no longer afford the cost of living here. It is time that we address the affordability crisis in our district, and it is going to be a top priority for me in Albany.
Thank you. Anthony?
Sure. Environment would be they're all kind of competing. I would say environment, crime, and affordability. The Environmental Bond Act would be a big help. That is something that is the investment we need to make. Our climate, the CLCPA is going to be an expensive transition, but we need to get there. We need to get away from fossil fuels and do it smartly and reliably, and that's going to take a lot of money. Crime. We need to address the rampant crime. The amount of catalytic converters that have gotten stolen out by me on the North Fork is mind-blowing. And that's not something that you think would spill into our communities out here. So, that's just one of many. As you can see in the city, homicides are down, but everything else is exponentially up. So we need to deal with the criminal justice reform and clean it up. There were changes that needed to be made. I think we all agreed. These just aren't the right ones. And lastly, inflation. Inflation, and coupled with all of that, and really the crime issue too, is mental health. We created, when I was in the assembly, the North Fork Mental Health Initiative. Assemblyman Thiel and Senator Laval on the South Fork had the South Fork Behavioral Health Initiative. We fortunately were able to continue to fund those. So there's a mental health aspect of it to it as well. But we're all coming out of COVID when it comes to inflation and rising costs and affordability. My affordable housing bill, hopefully that passes. So I just think that this is something that small businesses getting back on their feet. This is something that we all can collectively, regardless of party, agree that is what our focus should be, to get everybody out of this mess that was the pandemic. And hopefully we can get back to business.
Thank you. Now the candidates will make 1-minute closing statements. And Anthony, you will go first.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I thank you. Thank the League of Women Voters. Thank to everyone who's watching. for facilitating these debates. They're exciting. This is, it's actually fun for us, at least fun for me, in order for us to project our policies and, you folks get to decide. So I would suggest that my record speaks for itself in the almost 10 years that I've been in the legislature. I've always focused on my district and on what's best for my district. For example, as I mentioned earlier, the Equal Rights Amendment. I'm a Republican. I run the Republican and conservative lines. And that sort of bill is something that is controversial in some circles. But I vote what's best for my district. Affordable housing, same thing. It was a new tax. It was resisted to some extent from some of my own colleagues, and I had to explain to them how important it is, particularly on the east end of Long Island. So my record, I believe, speaks for itself. I do ask for your vote, and hopefully come November 8th, you'll send me back. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Skyler?
So I appreciate the League of Women Voters for taking the time to host this and everyone who has joined us tonight. When the pandemic was at its height, when vaccines were the most unavailable, I was helping seniors to schedule vaccine appointments. Again, I work for a nonprofit that works with our community. I have done everything that I can to make sure that Long Island families have what they need to survive and thrive, and that's what I'm going to continue to do in the Senate. You have heard two contrasting visions tonight. This election is going to be between pro-choice and pro-life. It's between those who support the middle class, who support renters, who support those struggling to keep their homes, and those who believe that those who are struggling to keep their homes have no place on Long Island. It is between people who are going to work for their constituents and who are not going to be there when they are needed most. I appreciate that you have taken the time to listen to me, to hear what I feel and to hear what I want to do for Senate District 1. And I think that there's a lot that we can get done in the next 2 years in the next legislative session. You can learn more about me at skylerforsenate.com. Follow me on social media, and I hope to see you at your doors before the election or at the polls on or before November 8th. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you. Thank you, candidates, for your candor and your civility this evening. And I want to thank Charles Certain and CTV for their technical support in making this debate available to all the voters of New York's 1st Assembly and Senate District. And thank all of you for watching. Both debates are available on the CTV YouTube site for your voting friends that couldn't join us tonight. The election is November 8th. You can vote at your convenience at one of the early voting sites beginning October 29th through November 6th, or by absentee ballot. And of course, at your regular polling place on November 8th. When you do go to vote, remember to turn your ballot over and vote on the two referendums, the Clean Water, Clean Air, Clean Jobs Environmental Bond Act, and the increase in the real estate transfer tax to fund affordable housing. Please vote.